Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the practical philosophy of objectivism to current events. And today we've got three really annoying articles. I don't know about my esteemed panel here, but there was the single article in here that didn't drive me absolutely insane. The first thing we're going to talk about is the UN's former climate change chief, Christian Figueres. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Anyway, she's apparently been sort of an advocate for bringing fossil fuel companies to the table to negotiate, of course, climate change issues, or to get them to conform to policies that the UN thinks is appropriate. She has now lost hope, and she wants to exclude them from these conversations because they're not conforming to her ideas of what they should be doing at this particular time to avert this climate catastrophe that they've been telling us for 50 years is happening right now. What do you make of this perspective? I know what I make of it. I'm very anxious to see what everybody else thinks of this. The second article is about Tesla is facing the prospect of worker unionization. Now, here in the States, the United Auto Workers have been striking for quite some time. If anybody has read even a snippet of their demands, they started out at a 46% pay raise, which is unbelievable. The reason they claim to have wanted a 46% pay raise is because that represents the profits that the CEOs made, and they wanted to be in step with the profits of the CEOs. That's since been dropped to 36%. They want a 32-hour work week. In other words, they want to bankrupt and destroy the American auto industry, which they sort of did before. The government had to nationalize them and take over for their failures. That was a union issue. But what do you think of this? The Guardian article was in typical form, very pro-labor. They want Tesla workers to organize. They claim that Elon Musk does illegal things like fire people who are trying to unionize. That in itself should tell the person who wrote the Guardian article, that unions have a sort of unequal privilege in the law. You should be able to fire who you want for whatever reason you want, especially if they're trying to extort wages from you that are not good. But of course, the Guardian uses profits and Elon Musk's worth and the worth of the company to try to leverage pity for the workers and to get you feeling guilty and angry. In the state of California, in the third article, is launching a lawsuit against the largest oil companies, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, etc. And it claims that the oil companies have misled the public about dangers of fossil fuels for decades. So this is more California politicians attempting to, I guess, hasten the demise economically and socially and politically of California. So what do you guys think of this? Let's start with that first article where, John, let me start with you since you're first in the queue here, where this UN person wants to exclude fossil fuel companies from something that interests them, from the creation of laws and regulations that would restrain them and hamper their profits and hamper their livability. We already know that the UN wants to kill the fossil fuel industry. Washington wants to kill the fossil fuel industry, as if these guys don't have an interest in keeping themselves alive. It's like they're being asked to sacrifice themselves for everybody else. What do you make of this crap?
Oh, yeah. Complete ridiculousness. It's, in my opinion, regulation without representation. They expect these companies to bend over and fix all this stuff without their input into it. It's just, they'll make the regulations even worse, and they'll probably be less effective without the industry that they were regulating being at the table. There'll be no warning against any unintended consequences. It'll be a free-for-all for them at the UN. And that's what they want. But just the idea that even disagreeing with climate is automatically considered obstruction is ridiculous. They want to shut down the debate. They want to ride that it's settled science line as much as possible. And this just fits with that.
Well, Thomas, it is obstruction, but it's the kind of obstruction I think is justified. It's the kind of obstruction I like, right? It keeps insane policies at bay and allows an industry that we depend upon to stay somewhat solvent for a little bit longer. What do you think about this woman's attempt to cut the fossil fuel industry out of the policy figures? Now, something John said that's interesting is that when the industry is there, they can make more pro-industry regulations, but then there's this thing called regulatory capture, where the people who are running the people within the industry who are at the heads of the regulatory commissions end up creating laws that help cartelize the industry, right? They push out competition and they favor their particular brand. What do you say to all this?
My initial thoughts go to, they shouldn't be involved in these talks anyway, because once again, we are for government being separate from business. It's about keeping the lines drawn and saying, right, a bit like the whole the Microsoft issue, antitrust laws when they came in, and they were like, look, we just want to build computers, like, don't worry about us, we won't worry about you, you stick to your lane, we'll stick to our lane. Why are they concerning themselves with being involved in these policies? Because then that's where it does lean to crony capitalism, and it creates further risk. And it almost sounds like a form of bribe, in the sense of, hey, look, you can be involved in this, and you can have an opportunity to block potential competitors or other areas, and it's a form of corruption, I think.
Yeah, exactly. The regulatory state encourages this kind of corruption. The regulatory state is basically, give me money and I'll give you special privileges, in while claiming at the same time that I'm helping the citizens be safe from you. Marco and Richard, what do you think of this craziness?
Well, I just wanted to say a few words about Christiana Figueres, this former UN climate change chief, with a personal anecdote. Because when I was 20 and 21, I lived in Costa Rica for a year. And one day on the streets, there was a big crowd of people, and I joined the crowd as a guy was coming down the crowd, shaking everybody's hand, surrounded by a couple of bodyguards. I remember it well because it was hotter than the fires of hell that day. And I had a Friends t-shirt on my head and some big dark glasses. And the bodyguards were extra twitchy when the guy got to me and shook my hand. Now, he turned out to be Jose Figueres, the president of Costa Rica, and the father of this woman here, Christiana Figueres. Now, one thing about Christiana Figueres is that she is also, among her other climate jobs, is the chair of the Earthshot Prize. That's the environmental prize set up by Prince William and David Attenborough, which is awarded to an environmental group or person each year since 2021. And she's been the chair. And in the first year of that prize, in 2021, guess who it was awarded to? Big drum roll, to the Republic of Costa Rica. It's amazing how this climate change money always seems to be attached to a boomerang or a giant piece of elastic somewhere along the line, and goes back to those people with a vested interest in dishing it out in the first place.
Yes, another day, another London School of Economics educated Marxist who's telling us how to live our life. This woman, I mean, if you read the article, the kind of stuff this woman says, things like, my patience has run out. It's like, well, make yourself
too bad
and get over it. I mean, she actually wrote an article on Al Jazeera praising Sultan Al Jaber. I mean, this guy is not the average Abu Jihadi in the middle of the desert. He's the president, he's the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. He's the guy who's been investing billions and billions on various infrastructure, oil and stuff like that. And he's the guy in charge of the COP28, which will be held in the UEA this year in Dubai in November. I mean, Dubai. So the elite of the world will converge with the big expensive planes, private planes, and all this kind of stuff to Dubai for the next month or so, just to tell us not to fly around. It's like, oh, for the love of God.
Yeah, it's crazy the hypocrisy that these people practice. And it's great that you point out the interconnections between all these people, because I think normies on the outside feel like, well, the people making the profits and benefiting from this are the oil companies. But no, there's a cabal of activists and scientists who actually get lots of grant money and prestige in political circles and get to run roughshod over political companies. They get lots of, or regular companies, they get lots of political power from being in the positions that they're in. And you cannot underestimate the power of that prestige, that social prestige and political prestige, and the money that they get. It's a factor here. Now, do you think that companies should refuse to honor these regulations that are set out by the UN? They should just stand up and say, you're wrong, I refuse to honor this, you have absolutely no jurisdiction over me. I'm an American company or I'm a British company, I am not going to pay attention to these. Even if you know, the Brits or the Americans become signatories to it, they're forcing me into a situation that is untenable for me. I refuse. And do you think perhaps they could start suing governments like the English government or the UN, this crazy world government that we're starting to fall under the umbrella of, for misrepresenting the climate catastrophe? What do you think of these two possibilities? John, let me start with you.
I would love if they did that, actually. That would be the moral and principled stance to take, but I have no delusion that they're going to actually do that. They've been pretty weak, in my opinion, in defending themselves over the past several decades. So I can't see them doing anything like that. I don't know. What was the other question?
Suing the UN for misrepresenting the climate catastrophe.
Yeah, right.
Can we say that misrepresentation, that fear, which has caused now chronic anxiety, at least among Americans? There's just been a poll that's come out that says so many people are feeling chronically anxious. Part of it is because of this climate catastrophe. How much mental illness has been caused by this? How much capital has been siphoned away from productive people? How many poor people have, the energy costs are now soaring through the roof? They can't afford things, even basic survival things, because of what this climate catastrophization is doing. So maybe we should sue them.
Yeah, I totally agree. But when they have the culture and most scientists on their side, it's going to be difficult to prove
scientists that. I might add, it's now coming out that many more scientists are starting to rock the boat a little bit. Marco, Richard, have you heard this? They're starting to say that I'm not a part of this consensus. This consensus is manipulated. And now they're starting to come out and rebel a little bit, you know, because we know how establishments are created. Establishments happen when, you know, are incentivized by the prestige and the money that goes in one particular direction. And we know what direction that is with government. Marco, Richard, do you think there's going to be any changes with now scientists coming out openly protesting the IPCC?
You certainly seem to see that a bit more, including the odd Nobel Prize winners come out against the climate settled science consensus, and even that starts to add some clout to a list of another 1,000 people who've also signed a recent document to indicate that there is a different outlook out there to the one that we've all been sold. I think when it comes to the oil companies, this is often a case of the sanction of the victim, because they are constantly being told to sign their own death warrant, to agree to fly the flag for their own demise, and that's a very sad situation to be in. Where and this particular article talks about how the transition to clean energy, but also the fact how that we need these companies to transition to clean energy. But if they don't do it, we'll do it without them, except that we can't do it without them because we also need them. So it's all tied up in a big mess. And the truth is that without the companies themselves to parasite off of, then the host cannot do what it wants to do. And this is an admission of that by Christiana Figueres.
But part of the issue is also that lots of the staff that work for these companies have actually been captured by this kind of ideology. So it's effectively, you've got an enemy within, and you really need to change the culture, otherwise the company will go the same direction. I mean, this woman, as I said in the article on Al Jazeera, which is, by the way, a Qatari organ of information. She effectively threatened the company by saying, if you don't change, i.e., if you don't drop what is your core business and go renewable sources, you're gonna be left behind. You're gonna be wiped out. I mean, this kind of attitude is incredible, because they also want them to provide access to renewables to the people who don't have access to electricity. But how are you going to do that without the fossil fuel that allows you to travel around the world and make your I don't know how big a villa is, but certainly she doesn't go around living in a hut.
And one of the things you've also noticed here is in the push to the green energies is not going as successful as it was, because there was a recent auction here in the UK for offshore wind power, where it was a third of the price of 8 years ago offered to companies to bid for licenses. And the developers worked out they couldn't turn a profit at the price the government was offering. So there were 0 bids for these licenses. Market forces eventually corrects things.
And I think Norway isn't going the way that the rest of the world is trying to go. Lots of people are starting to step off the ship. Thomas, do you think Atlas should shrug here? Do you think the company should refuse to participate, take a principled stand against the UN, and publicize their principled stand against the UN? I think, as Marco and Richard said, it's hard because they're captured as well by this ideology. But do you think that might be a first step towards changing the culture?
100%. And I would urge them to even push harder and fight back. So, especially in terms of the lawsuit stuff, I would say do countersuits. There's more than enough examples of government backing specific things that have caused long-term health issues in population. Cigarettes, for example, were massively pushed and advertised by the government as being healthy for you, especially during World War II. That was all government, and that's what really sped it up. Everyone got their pack of cigarettes because it helped reduce the appetite, and they could sell it as a placebo for boosting morale. Where's their accountability?
And also fluoride. Have they pushed fluoride, which is actually a toxin that comes from aluminum production? It's a byproduct of aluminum production. But because some study noted a dearth of cavities in a particular region that happened to have higher fluoride counts in their water, it then became public policy to put fluoride in water, even though it is a known toxin. And there's tons of literature. You might know more about this than I do, Thomas. I don't know if you've studied this issue or not, that really makes this a potentially scary thing that has been the cause of lots of chronic illnesses in America, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked at that specific thing, but there is a wealth of cases like that. An example in America was toothpaste. Like there was a big thing. Americans basically fell out of the habit of brushing their teeth, and it made the government worried. And so they approached all these toothpaste companies to try and, find ways to help them create habits, which is why, when you brush your teeth and you get that tangy sensation or that minty sensation, there is actually no reason for that to exist in the toothpaste. The only reason for that there is, like in terms of cleaning your teeth, it's only put in, it's an irritant that's put into your toothpaste to help you feel like it's working, like it's doing something, therefore creating that reward part of a habit. But once again, that was like, but now you're putting irritants into your mouth. And it's just
lovely.
It's just generally accepted as an example.
Wow, that's absolutely crazy. Yeah, well, I think maybe we should start class action lawsuits against our governments for making us poor, for taking our property, and for putting us on this crazy path that climate catastrophization is taking us on. Any final words with respect to this particular article? This Christian woman, she is a real thug, man. She is a real thug. Her language is thuggish. Her attitudes towards business is thuggish. Her attitudes towards their own authority is thuggish. I hope people see this and unmask it for what it is. It's just power lust, plain and simple, masking itself as morality. Well, folks, you know, the United Auto Workers are on strike here, asking for crazy, crazy wage hikes, crazy working conditions. I think it'll bankrupt the auto industry here in America, as it has done in the past. And the Guardian, the writer for this Guardian article, who's based out of New York, frighteningly enough, he's an American who has this perspective, thinks that Tesla should unionize as well. And like the thugs that these people are, points to Tesla's value and points to Musk's value as the justification for being able to siphon off more money from the productive into the workers' laps. What, Marco and Richard, I'll start with you guys. What do you think of this crazy thing? I mean, why are these anti-monopolists for like a workforce monopoly? Why are they for, they claim to be for equal laws, and yet they don't mind laws favoring these worker cartels?
They're for force and control every time. I mean, this article describes Musk as a big baby who won't share, but the nature of the article is it sounds like it was written by a toddler stamping their feet, because they're talking about how Musk, to quote from the article, it says, Musk, he's greedy, he's ignorant, he's a crumb. Now, apparently a crumb means somebody repellent and untrustworthy. I had to look up that insult because I'm not fluent in lefty venom. But it seems that what they're interested in most of all is making force and control of everything that they can get their hands on. And of course, if there's one company that doesn't have a union, then it's a leak for the whole sector, and therefore it makes all of the force and control used by the other unions less powerful. And it's that they're outraged against.
Right, this guy really sounds like a rabid union cheerleader. It sounds like Jeremy Corbyn on acid, really. He's making stupid points like, oh yeah, the unions are the power behind the American dream. They allow blue collars worker to live the American dream. This is saying stupid things like, oh, the union are the only force that can allow prosperity. It's like, yeah, well, if you parasitize the company you're working for, what's left after? What about the guy who's actually, what about Elon Musk, who actually set up the company and therefore is giving job to people?
Well, not just that, but I mean, when they're parasitizing the company, that company passes that parasitism on to us. So yeah, you know, the people in the cartel locking out labor, except for their legally sanctioned labor, they do prosper a little bit more at the expense of the rest of us, at the expense of competition in labor, because it raises prices that are passed on to us. Elon Musk isn't going to take on those higher production costs. We are. So our lives will be made more difficult. More of our capital will be siphoned off to support those workers as opposed to our own lives. And how can anyone consider this fair? How can anyone blank this out? You have to really have a hard-on against wealth to block that reality out.
Definitely. And to be honest, I mean, this day and age, 21st century in the Western world, do you really need unions? Are you really going to be treated so badly? I mean, there's all sorts of legislation that even allows you to declare yourself a woman. So are you saying that the workers are exploited? And that's just nonsense. The best thing to treat union is what Rupert Murdoch did here in the 80s, I think, when he sacked the whole lot of people in Fleet Street, set up shop in the east of London, and rehired everybody on a new contract. So at that point, the union had to, you know, admit defeat, and that's the best way to deal with this mob, really.
Now it seems like the auto industry is a little too guilty, or a little too captured themselves to be able to do something like that, to fire everybody and say we're going to hire new people on a new contract. But they should. And I'm a union member, but I'm a reluctant union member. I have to be a member of this union if I want to work. SAG closes the shop to non-union workers, or you have to get permission from the gang in order to work if you're a non-union member going on to this union thing. That's a closed shop. That cuts down competition, right? And that's not great. If I could, I would get out. And if I could maintain the benefits that I've paid into, that's the thing. Once you pay into the system for years and years and years and years, and you accrue something that's coming to you, it's like Rand collecting Social Security, and you're owed it. You were forced to pay it, and now you're owed it, and so you want your restitution. Thomas, what do you think about this push to unionize Tesla? Now, in America, unions never really reached, I think, higher than 30% of the working population went union. Now it's down to about 7%. And I think the most of the union workers are public sector unions, which are destroying the states and bankrupting the states individually. What do you think of this push to unionize Tesla? And should Elon Musk be able to fire people who are trying to agitate for unions?
I completely agree with Marco and Rich's point. Rip them out, root and stem. Rip them out, root and stem. Because the interesting thing is they want to take a share of the profits. Those profits would be funneled into R&D, for example. Are they also going to share the cost of the failures? When Tesla starts going down because costs are running too high with the extortion they're being forced to pay, are they also going to pay out of their own pockets for the losses that have been accrued? And, the car industry on its own has got a crazy amount of regulation already as it is. Ford Motor Company, for example, in the UK, they are told by the government they must produce a set amount of cars. It is the government that sets the amount of cars they must produce. And then for every car they do not sell of that, they are fined. So it's like you have to produce X amount of cars to keep X amount of workers, but you can't overmake these cars because then it's kind of like flooding the market, as it will. So you'll be fined for all those that you don't sell. And that's
unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me that businessmen can thrive at all in this kind of world. I don't know if John is still there. Are you still there, John?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
It's just my camera. I'm having technical difficulties. Sorry.
Okay, so what do you think of this? I mean, this is crazy. You just heard Thomas say that the government prescribes the number of cars that an American car company can make and then fines them for any overages. This is madness.
It is. They may have just renationalized the car companies. It wouldn't matter because they've got their fingers so far into the business that you can hardly separate it anymore. And, all those regulations, like something, just that one example, and it's still the business's fault, not the government's for setting all these standards and everything. And it's just the woman in the article, or whoever it was, I should say, they said that the current strike, the first in UAW history to target all the big three, is to a large degree an attempt to ensure that shared prosperity persists as a genuine thing in the profitable auto industry. Yeah, I'd be questioning how profitable they are, especially after you guys get done with them. But yeah, shared prosperity by gang warfare and government control. God forbid you should have to persuade an employer or show them how you can improve the company. No, you have to strong arm them and guilt them into paying you more. And I don't know why you'd want to work for someone anyway that doesn't want to work with you for what you think is fair. It's just, it reminds me of the same vengeance everyone is going for. They want to punish the wealthy and successful and the things that work.
Now, am I not remembering history right? I seem to remember that the auto industry was in a great deal of trouble during the Obama administration. And one of the reasons they were in a great deal of trouble was because of these crazy pensions that the auto industry could not pay out. And the pensions, of course, were forced upon them by the unions. Now, people have to remember that the unions are not just a group of people that are trying to that gather together voluntarily and use the leverage of numbers to attempt to raise wages and increase their standard of living. No, they have legal privileges that compel companies to negotiate with them, which I think is awful. You have a right to join a union to try to increase your leverage. That's true. You don't have a right to monopolize the workforce and to legally hold your employer hostage. But that is what happened. And from my remembrance, the companies were going broke and the government had to step in and more or less nationalize the companies. Am I remembering history right, Marco and Richard? Do you remember this?
Yeah, that's sadly true. I mean, to be honest, the unions are just another of the gangs that are trying to get privileges from the state. That's the problem with the mixed economy. All you have gang warfare. People trying to win one over the next group of interest, just getting the government behind them and pointing the gun to the weaker group. And it's true about the unions. I mean, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis are the biggest lot. But Stellantis is a merger of FCA, Fiat Chrysler Automobile, and Peugeot PGA, which is partly owned by the French state anyway. And all these things, especially the European car makers, are just a bundle of state intervention and sort of protectionist racket that can only foster an environment where unions thrive, because they see weakness, they see possibility for them to actually gain some advantage over somebody else.
And here I'm sure go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, here in the UK, one of the biggest unions is the TfL union, the Union for the London Underground, where because they have a monopoly and there is no second London Underground that we can all move to instead, they're regularly on strike, and they already have tube drivers here have a salary of 55 or 60,000 pounds per year, starting salary just for moving a lever on what is an automatic train. And they also have 9 weeks holiday per year. And guess what? They're on strike right 9 weeks holiday per year, and they're on strike right now because these conditions are so terrible. Yeah. And you compare that to Elon Musk, who is offering one of the fears of this article is that he's going to take away the stock options of the people who join a union. So that means that they do have stock options already. They already have a share in the profits of the company in the current arrangement. So is he really such a demon? It seems not.
This is something the author of the article conveniently left out. He conveniently left out a lot of things, I have to say, because I think if he had given us the full context of unions, especially in America, people would be rejecting the idea left and right. What an unfortunate world we are living in today, where unions are experiencing a resurgence, and the politicians who are promoting them seem to have the backing of people. Walter Williams wrote a book called American Contempt for the Constitution, and he blamed the fact that the Constitution has been so gutted, not on Supreme Court justices or on politicians, but on the American people for allowing it to happen. I feel we're in a similar vein now with this private sector stuff, where these unions are starting to expand. People are actually thinking it's a good idea, despite all the evidence to the contrary, and they're giving their agency over to these parasitic organizations that wind up destroying the host. And the union workers already did it with American cars. They're going to do it again. And the public sector unions have been doing it to states for decades now. And yet we don't seem to be learning any new lessons from this old stuff. Any final comments on this? I think Elon Musk should hold the line. Yes, Thomas.
So there's 2 additional things I want to add to that as well. So my cousin works for one of the train companies that continuously goes on strike, and he only recently got a job there, and he said the machines are the most archaic things he's ever seen, and for them to do their journey they have to sit down and plot out what to do on a map, like pen and pencil, and draw it all out and make the changes. And he asked them, like, why don't we just get sat navs? Like, surely Google and stuff makes it easier. And they said, no, they tried to do that last time and they threatened to strike if they do it, because they're trying to minimize our job and there is a risk that they could make us pay us less money for it. So that's one example. And in terms of the train companies here never really had free autonomy anyway, because another friend who works on the railway lines, he said the government owns all of the track and they rent it to the company. So you have to you're trying to trade with the government of who can have what time slot, which it doesn't create that free system of healthy competition, because once again the government can play favors.
Oh yeah, this is crazy. Now, so on the one hand, you get the left talking about how the unions increase the standard of living of everybody. They don't. That's an abject lie. They increase the standard of living of a small population of people that are able to keep out competition. And they raise the cost of living for the rest of us. So they live at our expense. But they also keep technology from growing in an industry. And we have the recent example now of the writer's strike that is trying to shackle AI and make sure that a certain number of writers are staying in the room, in a writer's room, and stay employed in a writer's room, irrespective of whether or not they're superfluous. A couple of decades ago, we had a dock workers strike, where the dock workers in California for a number of days all went on strike because the companies were introducing a new type of loading technology that would have made a job or two irrelevant. Now, these are workers that make 6 figures a year minimum. They start out at 6 figures a year. I think the minimum salary at the time, a couple of decades ago, was somewhere in the neighborhood of $120,000 per year. Now, this would have made some of their jobs irrelevant. It would have increased shipping for us. It would have lowered costs, lowered the prices for all of us. But they won this fight because they kept things stranded in the docks for several days, and they kept the tanker truck boats backed up. And so now there is somebody who makes that amount of money who does nothing every day. This is what our unions are giving us. Didn't Rand write an article about this? What did she call it? The right to be mediocre. It's just, there's a great title that's just about this, or stagnation, the moral right to stagnation, or something like that, where the workers now are not agitating for better working conditions. They're keeping technology out, raising your cost of living. Don't forget, guys, that in a collectivist society like this, where groups get together and they try to vie for the levers of power, they gain at your expense. The very thing they claim capitalism is, this zero-sum game, this Darwinistic dog-eat-dog world, is the exact kind of world that they give us through their agitating. So don't let the people like The Guardian, with their blinders on and their hatred of wealth and their hatred of the good and their hatred of production, fool you. He left out a lot of stuff. It was a big fat lie, but that should be the title of The Guardian's biography. So the state of California, in its pursuit of suicide, is now launching a lawsuit against companies Exxon, Mobil, Shell, BP, which claims the companies have misled the public about the dangers of fossil fuel for decades. And part of this article suggested, there was an NPR piece that I listened to, suggested about rising sea levels in California being a real thing. Wildfires raging, of course, everybody can relate to the wildfires. But I was particularly curious about this rising sea levels that are damaging the California coast. And when I looked for evidence of it, I couldn't really find it anywhere. What I found was sea levels will rise by, and they have these computer models, of course, that they've based minimum and maximum numbers on. But nowhere is that actually happening, as far as I know, along the coast of California. Marco and Richard, what do you think of this? I feel like Newsom and the state legislature and the entire government of California is determined to murder us.
Well, I think they're right. In a couple of billion years, the planet might be in danger. So, they're just ahead with the times. But I think I'm a bit... I'm not sure about this one, because I think it's probably a good thing that we take this crap in the courts, because the courts, okay, the whole system is a bit leaning towards the left, but there's still some sort of threshold threats and work injustice out there. So to force the governments to face this kind of stupid statements, to force them to come out or in the open and make exactly that point in a court of law, it's going to be quite interesting, because are they going to talk about pyrophytes, which are plants whose seeds only come out of dormancy when they are exposed to fires? Are we going to talk about all the things that are involved in an environment where there is a natural fire coming up? Are we going to talk about how 10,000 years ago there was a big, massive amount of polar ice in the north of Europe, and who was there at the time to melt it? These things happen, so it would be nice to actually have proper facts in a court of law. And I'm really curious how these eco-statist nutters will actually be able to make the point that fossil fuel companies have been lying to us all this time.
So you've almost got your wish here, Mark. You wanted to see businesses and the state in court. Well, unfortunately, they're the wrong way round, and it's the state taking the businesses to court and not the other way round. And I wonder, one of the things that they're being taken to court for is for raising, it comes in the wake of companies like Exxon supposedly raising doubts internally about the dangers of climate change, about the dangers of their climate change policy, and cutting back on fossil fuels not being necessary behind the scenes. Now, I wonder how many conversations behind the scenes within government have been held to say that we can't actually kill the golden goose, we can't kill the lights in California and make everybody cold and starving. So I'm sure there's some paperwork behind the scenes that would be interesting to see in court as to what they really think when they're not on the podium.
Now, John, even though I agree with this, that I'd like to see some of this evidence brought out in court, you know, it suggested in the article that already there's several lawsuits against these companies for the very same thing. And I feel like the strategy of the government is to wear down these companies, take their resources, drain them away in these senseless lawsuits. Because the one organization that really does have access to unlimited funds, unlike what the Guardian suggested earlier, about Elon Musk. He talks about his fortune and then claims it's infinite. It's not. You just gave us the finite measure of it right there. But the government does have unlimited funds. They can't just tax the population in order to pay for these terrible lawsuits and run these companies into the ground. I mean, what do you say about this?
Oh yeah, I completely agree with your assessment there, because they know that the companies aren't really going to stand up for themselves on a principled manner, and they're going to constantly compromise. So all they have to do is keep wearing them away, and their goal of making energy more expensive will be achieved.
But then they blame the fossil fuel companies. They blame them for making things more expensive, and people believe it.
Right. Well, what about the people that bought the cars and drove them around and used the oil? They're not to blame at all. They're just stupid little lemmings that just follow whatever the news tells them. Well, and this idea too that the fossil fuel industry has even been successful at all in slowing down or in hampering climate change. It's all I see on the news and media and in school for the last 30 years was the climate change agenda. So to say that they're not winning, and now I think they're just getting vengeance. And again, trying to make things more expensive.
It's it's crazy, Thomas. I hear people on the left, friends of mine on the left, talk about how little power they have, how little power the left has, when I see institutional capture everywhere. I mean, I started learning about environmentalism in grade school in the 70s when this stuff started to become a trend. Now it is what they learn. It's not just a piece of the curriculum, it is the curriculum. So what do you make of this lawsuit? Is it good? Is it bad? What should the state of California be doing instead?
I mean, the question that comes to mind is, where does it end? Right? They're saying that these oil companies need to start paying to help cope with the fires and the sea level. okay, what? So the next gust of wind, somehow we've got to pay for that as well. Like the torrential downpour that we've had that's like flooded somewhere, we're paying for that as well. Like you just write them a license to charge you for anything that they deem is limited or not limited, linked to the weather. It's a dangerous precedent to set if you do not stand up and fight it and reject it on all fronts.
Have you guys noticed that when conservatives point out like really cold weather and snow, the left is like, what idiots these conservatives are. Weather isn't climate. But then when weather phenomenon happens where there's a big flood or there's a cyclone or some other disaster, most of which are exaggerated on the news and become much ado about nothing, but then suddenly weather is climate. And this is indicative of some massive shifts that unprecedented in history. And yet the reports that come out from Nobel Prize winning physicists and climatologists, and meteorologists who say, no, these trends are not actually unprecedented. There's actually nothing unusual going on right now. If anything, I mean, I think the forest fire disasters are issues of forest management. And they say somewhere in the neighborhood of 89% of these fires are started by human beings. It's not even a matter of, it's so hot the forest is burning down because of the climate. It's a matter of people being sloppy, careless, or doing something on purpose. And then forest management being so bad with its hands-off philosophy that there's fresh kindling for whatever maniac or neglectful person when he starts the fire. Well, folks, do we offer an antidote to all this insanity? Marco and Richard, let's go down the line and see what it is we should be doing. What should we do about unions? What should we do about these climate Marxists? What should we do about the state of California pushing the Californians off the environmental cliff?
Well, I think the best thing for us to do is just to ignore them and just live our life the best we can and show that there is an alternative to their spreading of fears and all sorts of doomsday scenarios that they come up with. You can't waste your life listening to these guys and ruining your own life because they say so. It's just, be confident your life is yours to live and move on.
And I think one thing that you have to do is be rational about it. And often, although somebody may be on your side on a particular item, such as the climate change, for example, they may not be on your side for the right reasons. So you've got to take each case in kind. I've got an example of that. One guy, the head of a union here in the UK, a guy called Gary Smith, recently blasted the net zero agenda. He's the head of a big union of about 500,000 people. And he said, we've cut carbon emissions by decimating working class communities. And there's a good point in there. This does affect the ordinary worker. This does affect the ordinary person. Lots of the conclusions that it'll go on to will be socialist nonsense. So you've got to make sure that you understand what the reason is that you back a certain argument, what the grounding for it is, and therefore you can argue it rationally right through and integrate it with the rest of your arguments.
Yeah, countries like the UK and the United States and California in particular contribute something like 1% or less to the global warming phenomenon. So even if they went completely carbon free in the next few years, which is what they're suicidally trying to do, it would have a negligible effect on the environment. And it seems the countries most engaged in attempting to reverse this problem by political force all contribute such small amounts to the carbon footprint that it would be a negligible amount. Other countries actually need to take heed of this stuff, and they won't, because they need to live first. They need to prosper first. They need to get rich first before they can get clean. John, what do you say? What do you say to all these? Is there an antidote to all of this insanity?
Oh, I like Marco and Richard's points. Definitely agree with that. But I also think pointing out or exposing their contradictions as much as possible, just to show that these policies don't make sense, especially when you put them next to each other. Like the unions and the climate agenda, they are in a way competing against each other. They are contradictions, and to just keep showing people that their whole ideology doesn't make sense is the only thing I can think of to get people to stop taking them so seriously. Like you said, like the things they're getting so excited about are negligible. It's not going to make any difference if the US gets perfectly carbon free. Not one bit of difference. So,
well, but they will control businesses, which I think they want to do.
Yeah.
More than the climate problem. I think these people want to feel powerful, and they like controlling people who seem to have control over their own universes and over their own values. They don't like that. And
Nope.
rather than emulate that and do that themselves, they seem to control them. And that seems to give them a sense of power. Thomas, do you have any thoughts with respect to getting out of this? Are you like Marco and Richard and John? Hey, ignore it, live your life to the best of your ability, and call out the hypocrisy when you see it, and that in the end is going to win the day.
Yeah, I don't know how often I would call it out, because more often than not, these people aren't ready to have their ideas challenged, right? They don't want that discussion. So my statement to them would instead be careful what you wish for.
Indeed. And their prophecies have a way of coming true, but they're self-fulfilling prophecies because they sort of make it happen. Jonathan Honig with $4.99. Thank you, Jonathan, for watching. Jeff Bannister, $5 Canadian. Thank you, sir. Bonnie Bertrand, 99 cents. Thank you very much for that. Folks, upcoming shows, 7 p.m. UK time, the Fountainhead Book Club for ARC UK members. The session will also be live streamed to YouTube members. Well, folks, that is, I think, all that we have today for the reality show. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Please spread it around. People need to get rational philosophy as soon as possible so we can reverse the tide of irrationality that is taking us over a cliff, I think, very soon, meaning the next 10 years or so are going to be pivotal for us. So get rational philosophy quick. Get your shit in order as fast as you can. What does that mean? That means right now you should be checking your premises. Peace.